put this together, and it's called The Adventures of Mike and Marcia in the Middle East. We left on May the 10th, as you all know, for a 3-week trip to the Middle East. It was sponsored by Union Seminary in Richmond, and there were several other clergy couples that went. 3 professors went with us and 24 students at the seminary. So we had a whole busload.
We had to behave.
Yeah. And there you see a couple of the professors and some of the students. As we arrived, we flew all night to Vienna and didn't get to see that beautiful city at all. We changed planes and flew on to arrive in Amman, Jordan in the afternoon. Amman is the capital of Jordan, and it's home to about 4 million people. There are only 6 million in Jordan, so the capital city. And Jordan's a fairly good-sized country, which you can see here on the map, but 90% of it is desert. Everything is sort of stacked up on the western rim, which is right next to the Jordan River. They are just opposite the Jordan River, on the just on the other side from Israel. And a lot of Palestinians from refugees from the fighting in Israel, from the occupation of the Israelis in the West Bank, have gone across the river, and they are living in Jordan now. You can see how crowded the city is. It's trying to modernize, and everything is built out of limestone or mud brick blocks. When you stand in the middle of the city, you can see all you can see from, as just to the horizon is building after building after building. You can imagine, it is a very old city. And like many places in the Middle East, there are ancient ruins underneath the modern city. Many layers of civilizations built on top of each other. Here you see the remains of a Greek temple that is on top of the hill. Also, one of the reasons that things don't stand for centuries and centuries is that there are frequent earthquakes in that area. So temples and everything just naturally, fall down. And they leave them lying there, and the people will pick up the stones and build something new on top. This was a temple, you can see Zeus's hand. That's all that's left of him. Poor man.
Zeus.
We also saw a Roman theater there, which was very, very interesting. It reminded me of half of the Colosseum, where they had the slaves fighting the animals and all of that. And this was half of it, with the stage across the center. When the Romans came to the Middle East and took it all over, they just built onto or rebuilt what was there. So you can see the ruins up on the top of the hill and different stages of newer, older buildings, all just sort of jammed together there. Underneath the theater that they had saved was a tiny little museum. And this museum is devoted to the clothing and culture of the original people of Jordan, who were nomadic herders, sort of like the Bedouins, the forefathers of the Bedouins, and like Abraham would have been. And these are the kinds of costumes that they wore, and they were woven out of silk or wool. Always, the women had their heads covered and their faces covered. as well, because their beauty was not allowed to be seen by anybody else. Also in the museum were cases of their jewelry. Now it looks very dull. The reason that it looks dull is because all of these, the chains and everything are made out of silver, and what is attached are coins, silver coins. The women actually were the bag. The women wore the wealth of the family around, and they had belts and headdresses and necklaces, and they were all made out of coins. So anytime, I guess, there was a business transaction, the man had to go to the woman and say, "Give me your necklace." But it was interesting. From Amman, we traveled north one day to see some more ruins in the north, and this is just one of the typical eateries. It's an open-air place, and what they've done is they've put up walls and a roof made out of woven mats, like tatami mats, and fans, and you just, in the cool, in the shade, it's fairly cool, because there's no humidity at all. So when you're eating in the shade, it's comfortable. And we ate several places that were like that. The other ruins that we visited were of a Hellenistic or Greek city that is Jerash, or what in the Bible is called Gerasa, in the northern part of Jordan. The next day we went south of Amman. Amman is pretty much the northernmost city in Jordan. We went south to a small town called Madaba, and they have a Greek Orthodox church there that is dedicated to St. George, the one that killed the dragon, and there he is. And also, an interesting thing, this is typically Greek Orthodox with the very ornate paintings and, that look like icons on the wall, and the lanterns, brass lanterns hanging for light and incense, and the screen up front. And one of the really interesting things in this ancient church is that there were so many pilgrims to the Holy Land during the Crusades when that church was built, that somebody made a map for them in mosaic on the floor so that they would know how to get from there to Jerusalem. That's what remains of that map. From there we traveled a little farther south and we went to Mount Nebo, and y'all know what Mount Nebo is famous for. That's the place that Moses went up to see over into the promised land, but he never made it. He got up to the top of the mountain and God said, "You will not be able to enter that land over there." We couldn't see it real clearly. It was very, very hazy.
Moses couldn't see it either.
Well, I hope he couldn't see it. But it's sort of across the center there is where the Jordan River is, and then the hills rise up on the other side, that where Israel is. Also up there is a replica of Moses' staff, and then it sort of has a serpent curled around it. I don't know what the significance of that is, but it was interesting up there on Mount Nebo. We left that and we traveled even further south that day, and we saw two of the most common sights that we saw in Jordan. The first one is sheep crossing the road. We were always running into sheep crossing the road. Many, many, many sheep. There's more sheep. Many sheep. And then we saw also the desert. You can see, this sort of looks like Utah or Arizona a little bit. It was just desert land, sand, hot. I cannot describe it. But suffice it to say that I ended up with sun poisoning, but the trip was worth it. So, we saw, this is one example of what is called a Crusader castle. Dotted all over the Holy Land are the remnants of castles that were built when the Crusaders actually won a battle or won back some of the Holy Land in the 5th and 6th century. And they would make these big mud bricks and put together these castles. And this was a fairly large one in the middle of the Jordan. Very far from water or anything. It's called El Karak. Okay. There's just another view of how big that castle really was. Must have had thousands of soldiers quartered there in the Crusades.
Did you see a lot of armed soldiers and stuff on there?
In Israel, yes.
Yeah.
Nowhere else. Just in Israel. From El Karak, we went a little bit further south in Jordan to the city, the ancient city of Petra. And Petra is mentioned in the Bible. Petra is a fascinating place. It was built by wandering nomads from Saudi Arabia, and they found what essentially is a dry riverbed, a wadi, that was a channel in the rainy time, and they harnessed that water. The sides of the gorge, they constructed into drainage ditches. And every time it would rain, the water, instead of running down into the wadi that would wash it away, it ran into the channels that they dug on the sides, and then they dug cisterns in the ground, and they filled it up, thousands and thousands of gallons of water, they say, in these cisterns. And they dug into the salt red sandstone, and those were their houses. They lived in these caves, and they put these fancy facades on the caves that were their homes and their tombs and their businesses, and fascinating place. It goes for like a mile down this channel. This is the main entrance to it, which is for centuries was hidden with sand, and it's called the souk, and it's about this wide. You have to walk down this channel, and it's a little bit scary. I don't know if you can see, but see the striations on the walls? Those are the channels for water that they have dug out, and points for collecting the water. Okay. This is the first building that you see at the bottom of the souk, where it opens up to where the city is. And this is called the Treasury Building. And this is the one that was featured in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, I think. There's some more of those magnificent carvings. The weather, the water and the wind is eroding it, but they are unbelievable. There's our first view of camels, and they are pretty bad-tempered animals. You don't want to get close to them unless you have to.
Did you ride one?
No. I did, however, ride a donkey. But donkeys, I don't want to go there.
I see those pictures soon.
Yeah. This is called a monastery there that was carved by Roman Catholic priests. I it took over the entire Middle East and would use what was there. So, okay. From there, we traveled straight down to the very, very bottom point of Jordan, which is called Aqaba. And it's where three countries come together, Jordan and Israel and Egypt, right on the Red Sea. And we had to go down there and go through customs in order to come back up into Israel. It was an interesting experience. But here's our first view of some buildings in Israel, and then on the other side of the water you see there, that's Egypt. So, southern Israel is very desert-like, just as Jordan is. This is actually the ruins of Masada, which is on a mountaintop. It was a castle and fortification that was built by King Herod, the King Herod of biblical fame, when Christ was born. And in 70 AD, it was the last refuge for the last remaining freedom fighters from Israel, from Jerusalem. The temple had been destroyed, Jerusalem had been destroyed, and they were all that was left. And Rome just crushed them. Just crushed them. This is just showing you that it was so high up on top of this mountain, we had to go up in this cable car, way up there in the air.
The Israeli soldiers do their oath of allegiance in Masada. So, but they actually walk. So as part of their last day of trading before they take their oath of allegiance to the state of Israel, they walk up to Masada, and then there they declare the oath that it will never,
Masada will
Masada
never
will never
happen
happen again. So it's a very significant from a political and religious standpoint.
Wasn't that made into a movie?
Yes.
Yes, it was. It was very heart-wrenching because the hero died in the end, you know. Here you can see we're up on the top of Masada. It's very bleak and just sandy and everything up there, and just these ruins lying around. And in the distance, you can see the Jordan River and the Dead Sea down at the bottom. Yeah, and the Dead Sea actually is shrinking. Part of the reason is because the Jordan River, which feeds it from the north, is being tapped on both sides by Jordan and Israel for irrigating crops. That is the most fertile valley in both countries, and so and yet it's desert. So they irrigate their farmland with the fresh water from the Jordan, and so the Dead Sea doesn't get in. And you can see that it is just evaporating. You can see the salt, the lines of salt along the keys that go out into the. This is Qumran, what is left of a mud brick village where the Essenes lived during the time of Jesus. And they were a sort of hermit type group of monks of the Jewish faith. And they lived together in the middle of the desert and worshiped together and copied scrolls. That's basically what their livelihood was. They copied scrolls, Hebrew scrolls by hand. And this is the place, this is the community, but go to the next one. That's one of the caves in the hillside behind the community where the jars were found that had the Dead Sea Scrolls in them. Right. People lived in those caves, and they kept sheep in those caves. It was, you know, it was just a common thing in that area that, you know, a cave was a place of refuge. And if you came upon an empty one and you needed to live there for a month or two, it was yours. Here's one of the scrolls that they discovered there at Qumran. It is in a tiny museum right there on the ground. And it was fascinating to see, just fascinating. The brittleness of that sheepskin and the fineness of the handwriting. It's awesome. Here I was telling you about the Jordan Valley and some of the green that proliferates there because it's all irrigated.
If you look at the mountains,
Yeah.
you can see white, that is snow. So we're in the middle of the desert with snow in the mountains.
Yes.
You can see it a little bit more clearly in the next one.
Yes, as we get up into Galilee. Go back one. Just north of the Jordan River, of course, is the Sea of Galilee. And it is, I've got it written down here, it's 13 miles long and 8 miles wide. And we stayed on its shore for 3 days in the city of Tiberias. It was really neat to get up in the morning and see the boats, the fishing boats going out, just like they did.
Just like they did.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. This mountain is Mount Hermon. It's the tallest one in Israel, fairly near the Sea of Galilee in the northern part of Israel, and that is snow. And this was in May. There's a lot of snow on there all year round, and that snow is what actually feeds the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan and on down. So it was a beautiful sight there. This is the headwaters where the snow melts and gathers there, and it's called Tel, which is mountain or hill, and Dan, you've heard of the territory of one of the brothers, Dan, up in the north. And Tel Dan, the hill, is a very, very old, ancient Canaanite and Hebrew worship site because there's water there. So obviously civilization is going to be formed around the water. So these are actually Stone Age remains of an ancient worship site that was Canaanite or pre-Canaanite, certainly pre-Abraham, there at Tel Dan. From the top up there, we could see the whole countryside down below. And over in the distance, sort of a little to the right in the middle, you can see a big white building. That's a mosque that is on the other side of the Jordan River in Syria. That's how close they are. They can fire at each other from the hilltops, you know.
The white buildings in the foreground, I guess, right at the bottom of the picture, that's the UN mission, the peacekeeping force of the UN between Israel and Syria.
That's their headquarters. And behind us, on the hillside, we were stopped on the road in the bus. Behind us was another hill, and up on the top of that hill was the Israeli surveillance installation, just bristling with all kinds of radar and antennae and everything, and you know, the biggest fence you've ever seen around it. And these people are watching those people who are watching those people. Very interesting.